Hey guys, in this video we're going to put a subframe under the budget Nova. Now the one that's in there is one that was in my 73 Nova back in the 90s. I wrecked it, it's got a bad bend in it, so I didn't want to rebuild it. Now the one that I'm going to put in there came from a subscriber. I paid a couple of $100 from it from Mr. Ronnie. Mr. Ronnie, thank you very much. And I've rebuilt all the components, got it cleaned up and painted. We're going to get this one out first, and then we're going to put the new one in there and put everything on it. Okay, so the subframe is partially disassembled. Now I needed a couple of parts off of it, started taking it apart. I'm going to finish getting the control arms and stuff off, the steering box stuff off, to make it much lighter to deal with. If the tires were still on it, you could just roll it out from under the car. That's not the case here, so I'm going to try to lighten it up so I can deal with the subframe, get it out of the way. Now there are only 4 bolts that hold a subframe in. Now there's plenty of cables and wires and fuel lines and other stuff that connect it to the car if all that's hooked up. But once you get the engine and transmission out, you get your wiring, fuel lines and brake lines and all that other stuff disconnected. There's 4 bolts that hold it in. 2 at the firewall, 2 back on the floor, back by the seat bracing. Now there may not be 4 on this one just because I put it in here good enough to get it rolling, but we're still going to take all those 4 bolts loose if there are 4. Get this thing out from under the car. First I'm going to get the rest of the parts off to make it light, drop it out from under the car, then we're going to start getting the new subframe set up under there and then assembled. Okay, so I got all the parts stripped off the subframe. Now what I'm going to do is jack the car up, put the body on the jack stands so the subframe hangs free, and then I'll take the bolts out, let the subframe down with the jack, hopefully not dropping it, slide it out from under there, and then we're going to clean up the firewall and all that stuff a little bit, see if we can get that looking a little bit better before we put the new subframe under the car. Okay, so I'm going to take these front 2 bolts out. I've got the jack in here holding it up. These were really just set in here just good enough to get it rolling around. And this one didn't screw all the way in, so I hope my nut is not messed up. Alright, that one came out good enough. Now for the other side. Now for the 2 in the back, and I hope this thing doesn't fall down. That side fell down a little bit, but not too bad. Now for the last one, and I expect the back of the subframe to kind of fall down a little bit, but that's okay. Kind of like that. And you can see here where I wrecked the car and crushed the subframe in. And now that this side has got a little pull to it. Now it's still bolted up, all the damage was back here. It did change the alignment on this side because after the accident happened, I drove the car for another 10 or 15 years. I just had that side, the alignment was not ideal at all. This side's straight, but yeah. Okay, I got the old subframe out. Before I stick the new one in there, first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to clean this firewall up a bunch. Now, this thing's pretty rough. It's beat up all around the distributor area. It's beat up here when I put the floor pan in. You might remember me having to bash that out. And I've got my patches and stuff showing. Now, if you were trying to make this into a really nice car, you would have replaced whole panels on this thing. You would have replaced the entire floor, and probably the firewall wouldn't be a bad idea. Plus, anyway, it's got patches in it. I'm going to put a little bit of seam sealer on those that I can get to under here. I'm going to re-seam seal the firewall. First thing I'm going to do, go over it with a wire brush, clean everything off, and I'm going to put some rust reformer on this thing, get it all flat black, at least get it looking a lot better, treat the rust the best I can, try to get it to where it's presentable looking compared to the subframe I'm about to put under it, because it looks pretty good. Okay, got the firewall cleaned up with a wire brush drill, and it looks pretty good. I fixed a few of the dents here and there that it had. I've still got to drill out a couple of broken off bolts where the wiper motor mounts, but I'm not worried about that right now. I really just want to get this thing looking pretty good to match the subframe. Now the subframe is flat black. I'm going to hit this also with some rust reformer first, then go over it with flat black, make it match. It'll look pretty good. Once I get this done, I can seam seal it later. I don't have any, I thought I did. But once I get this done and it's halfway dry, we'll throw the subframe under it. Okay, so we got the firewall cleaned up and painted, ready to put the subframe under it. I'm going to be using some energy suspension polyurethane body bushings. Now, I bought the kit that comes with the hardware. I will put a link to this kit in the description of the video, so if you want to get one of these, you can. One thing you need to know. From 1968 to 1972, Novas used a 1/2 inch spacer. Now when I say 1/2 inch, it's really about 7/16. These measured in their original, they measured 0.452 or something like that. 0.442, which is roughly 7/16 of an inch. So 7/16 to a 1/2 inch thick will put you close enough. If you don't have these and you put this together, your fenders aren't going to line up right. It's going to be a nightmare. And these go on top of all the bushings up against the body. Now, 73 and 74 did not use these. Same body, same subframe, but they had a taller bushing that was this much taller than the previous year bushing. So if you're going to put a bushing kit like this on your 73, 74, you're going to have to get some spacers, make some, or find some old ones that are off of 68 to 72. Now, you can find the front bushings, and the only place the spacer goes is at the front right here. Now, you can find the correct bushings for 73, 74. I bought mine from Classic Industries that I used on Frank and Nova. So if you want to use that, you can use that and then use polyurethane everywhere else, which is what I did on that one, just because I had them. But if you're buying a polyurethane bushing kit or any kind of aftermarket bushing kit and you don't have the original spacer, if you bought a car that was all taken apart, like I did this one, you're going to have to find one of these spacers, or you're going to have to use the taller bushing. Now, you can use the taller bushing on the older cars if you're just putting stock rubber bushings on there and you don't have these, but they're kind of expensive, and it's probably just easier buying stock bushings and finding a spacer or making them. Okay, so here's the subframe. Now, when I first got this, like I said, I paid $200 for it. It had been sandblasted and it had a bunch of body filler on it and had it smoothed out. Now, that wasn't really the look I was going for. They'd done a good job of it, but it wasn't the look I was going for. And since it had not been painted, it was kind of half done. There was some rust on it. So first thing I had to do was cut the old subframe connectors, or what was left of them that had been welded to the back of the subframe. I had to cut those out. Once I got that done, I was able to grind the whole thing down with a wire brush and a grinder, clean it up really good, the best I could, and paint it. I also did that with the control arms. I cleaned those up. I rebuilt those, put new bushings, put new ball joints in them. Then I cleaned up the steering box, painted that, and then I painted up the springs, the center link, and I have all brand new inner and outer tie rod ends to put on this thing. So what we're going to do first, we're going to get the subframe mounted in the car with our new bushings and hardware. Once we get it mounted in the car, I'll put some jack stands on the front and we'll start putting the control arms and steering linkage and all that stuff together. Alright, so the first thing you want to do is get a jack under the front of the subframe, which it's not light, but it's not super heavy either. But get a jack under that. You can get it kind of close. And then you want to get a couple of jack stands under the back of the subframe to hold it up off the ground, and then you can get your bushings figured out. Alright, now you get to get the whole thing kind of slid over to the left a little bit. There we go. Right about there is where it needs to go. It's got to come up some, but that's close. Alright, so here's the way this goes per the instructions. Now these bushings have a certain number on there, and the instructions tell you which one goes in which position. So your subframe is sandwiched by these two. This sleeve goes in this bushing. This bushing goes on the bottom of it and presses onto that kind of tight, snugly. So that's on there like that. You've got your bolt and your big washer, and you've got your spacer that is not in the kit. You put that on top. You put that through there, and then your nut kind of floats around in there. Lift up a little bit on this, get your bolt started. and you leave this one loose, because what you're going to have to do is get the other one in, and then there's alignment pins right here that go into the body. You get these pins aligned to the body, and once you tighten everything, you get those lined up and put, I use like a 1/2 inch extension or something like that. I've got some big bolts I can use too, but you put that in there, get that lined up, and then you torque everything down to the factory spec, and that gives you your perfect, well, I ain't gonna say perfect, that gives you your alignment from the frame to the body. So we're going to get the other side started now, get the back started, then we're going to get some pins in here and get everything tightened down. Okay, so next we're going to put the body bushing in the back. This bushing goes on top, this one in the washer goes on bottom, if I get it facing the right direction. And they sandwich in between the subframe that I've got to get down a little bit in order to get the bushing in between there. It's just not that easy to do. There we go. Alright, now we get the bushing on the bottom pushed up on the sleeve with the washer and the bolt. Alright, now for the other side. Now what I'm doing is taking an extra 5/8 bolt and using it to line up the subframe with the hole. I've already got the other side in, so get this side in. And this will, if you're using a 5/8 bolt, it'll kind of thread into the body. Not really, but it threads in enough to where you know you're centered up in the hole. Alright, so I've got this one where it's lined up, the other side is lined up. And you can also take this to an alignment shop after you're done. If you need to adjust it a little bit, they can tell if the front and the rear is centered, as long as your rear end is centered on the leaf springs. So we're going to tighten this up a little bit. I'm not going to try to torque it yet. I'm just going to hit it with the impact to get it tightened up so it won't move. And then I can tighten up the back. All right, and we're fully seated in the nut in here all the way into the back of the nut, which is good. Now we're going to do the same thing over here. I've got my bolt all the way up into the lineup hole. We're going to make sure our bolt comes all the way up into the square nut. All right, that one's in. Okay, so we got the subframe bolted to the car. Now we got to start putting the control arms on. I'm going to start with the lower control arm. I'm using new hardware. I always use grade 8 stuff when you can do it. The shear strength and the tensile strength are both stronger than grade 5. So some people will claim that you want to use grade 5 in suspension stuff, but there's no reason to. You want to use grade 8. Sometimes with new bushings, it might be a little tough to get this control arm up in the hole. I have to wiggle it a little bit, get it lined up. And you might have to use a rubber hammer or something. Alright, I got my plastic hammer. See if I can get this to go up in here where it needs to go. I got one side close. Sometimes you can use a smaller bolt, screwdriver, to get everything lined up. Alright, now for the back bolt. And then I'm using metal lock nuts. For something like this, I won't use the nylon lock nuts. They should probably okay, but I just rather use metal lock nuts. Now I'm going to tighten them up most of the way, but not all the way. Now these studs right here are special studs. You can use bolts, but these are knurled to lock into the subframe. If you use regular bolts, getting in there to hold them tight while you tighten up the nuts is kind of a pain in the butt. So it's better to use the correct knurled hardware if you can get it. All right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my spring and my spring compressor, compress my spring up, try not to die while I put that in there, and get my spindle hooked up. Okay, when replacing coil springs on this car, there is a top and a bottom. The bottom is more flat and the top is less flat, I guess you'd say. Anyway, there are pockets in the subframe and in the lower control arm that the end of the frame, end of the spring has to set into. So to be properly clocked, the bottom of the spring will be setting in the relief right here in the control arm, and the top will be setting right here. And there's also a hole in the top that you can't see right now, but there's a hole in the top right here in the indentation that you should be able to see the end of the spring right there to know you've got it set up in there. If you can't see the spring up against that hole, you know you've got it twisted. So now what I'm going to do is hook my spring compressor up and compress this spring down just enough to get it inside the control arm. Alright, so ideally you want to get the spring compressor kind of close to the middle of the spring, because if you get it too close to the top and too close to the bottom, when you take the pressure off of it, you won't be able to get the hooks out of the spring so that you can get the spring compressor back through the control arm, which is pretty much a pain even when you do it the best way. So we're going to get it hooked about that far apart, tighten it up a little bit, probably use the gun to run that in, because it takes a long way to, there we go. And hopefully we've got it far enough apart to where we can actually get the spring to compress as much as we need it to. This is in the way. Yep, we're going to have to do something different here. Alright, I reset it to a much more dangerous section. Probably still can't get it in there. And I do have a hole in the top, so this thing's not going to be that big of a deal, but this needs to set there, that needs to go there. So all right. Well, the problem is it's got to compress a lot more. Well, maybe not. Alright, so now time to get the jack under it and see if I can jack it up enough to get the spring compressed. But I kind of doubt I can. Alright, let's see if I can get this. And I've got my Zerk fitting on my ball joint, which I probably should have left off until I figured this part out. Maybe, right. Alright, now we're just moving the car up. Hey, looks like it's close enough. And then my upper ball joint nuts laying right here somewhere. Alright, there it is. Gonna have to see if I can put some weight on the car and hope I don't slip off the jack. There we go. Move the spring on the way, see if we can get these tight, and then I'll try to start. I'll have to try to get the spring compressor out of the spring. All right, I can torque those later, but for now, I want to see if I can get the coil spring compressor out. All right, I'm going to take the pressure off with the jack, let it set back down on the jack stand, and then I'll see if I can get the spring compressor out without having to cut it in half. Sometimes I just take the whole rod out of the upper piece. It's the only piece that's threaded. You can sometimes slide this between the pieces, but if not, you should be able to get it to go back through the hole in the bottom for the shape. It can be a trick. Now to get the upper piece out, which is the real trick. Sometimes you kind of unscrew it. There we go. Just enough, I think. Okay, so next we're going to put on the backing plate and the steering knuckle. I cleaned these up pretty good, but not a great job, but I did clean them up. Backing plate's going to go on, and you've got this little lock tab here that I didn't clean up. And you've got the part that holds the drum brakes. Now if this is disc brakes, you'll have just a big nut right here. And then your steering arm, steering knuckle, whatever you want to call it, has got one long bolt and one short bolt. You want to make sure you get those in the right spot. You tighten up your top. There's probably a torque spec to that. I'll have to look it up later. I don't know it right now. I'm not going to look it up. Get my other two bolts tightened up. Alright, we're going to go ahead and put this hub on here. And I've got new bearings and stuff for this one. I'm not going to put them in yet. I'm just trying to get this thing rolling. And there's a certain amount of preload you want on this. I do it by feel, but there's a certain amount of preload you want on it, and you want to be able to get your cotter pin in it, which I don't have one right here, but that'll get me rolling. All right, now just like with the other side, this is just temporary. I'm gonna put new bearings and seals and all in this, but for now, just to get this thing rolling, so I can get it ready to put brakes on it. Okay, so we got the front suspension put together. Now it's time for steering. I'm going to be using all new AC Delco inner and outer tie rod ends and adjusting sleeve. And then we're going to put a factory power steering gearbox on here. Got the center leak cleaned up and painted. Got my idler arm, a new one of those ready. We're going to put all this stuff together, see if we can get it rolling and get this thing ready for some brakes. All right, the gearbox I'm using is the gearbox that came with this subframe. I cleaned it up really good and painted it. And it was working fine. He bought an aftermarket subframe, so it's not like there was anything wrong with this one, I hope. So I'm going to get this thing mounted up here first. I'll say I am. There's 4 ears on these gearboxes. There's only 3 holes in the frame. But these gearboxes were designed to fit more than 1 year car, so that's why you have 1 ear sticking up that's not being used. And they're pretty heavy. So you want to make sure you got this thing lined up where the threads are actually engaged. straight, not cross-threaded, because if you cross-thread it, you're going to have a real bad day. Okay, I've got my center link here all painted up. I've got my idler arm hooked to the center link. It's just bolted on. It's not tight yet, so I haven't got that torqued down. Now I can move it around a little bit as I need to. And first thing I need to do is get my castle nut for my pitman arm, so I can put my center link on the pitman arm first. There we go. Now come down here and deal with the idler arm. Have to turn that a little bit. Get it to line up. I want to turn the arm, not the steering box. I want to keep that straight. Alright. Get my bolts going through my idler arm to the frame. Alright, now I can put my nuts on the inside, tighten it down, tighten down my pitman arm nut over here, and then I can start putting my tie rods and adjusting sleeves on. I'm going to put my nut in the 3/8 socket there and use that to start it so I can reach in there, a little swivel socket. Alright, so each side of the car for the steering has an inner tie rod, which is your large one here, an outer tie rod, which is your small one, and an adjusting sleeve which connects the two. This basically connects the steering knuckle to your center link, and this gives you an adjustment so you can adjust toe in. Now both of these are threaded in opposite directions. One of them is right hand thread, one of them is left hand thread, and what that does is that lets you turn this and bring this both in or both out at the same time. So you want to get this put together first carefully, and you want to make sure you've got the got it going in the right direction, because it can fool you. It's probably marked, but you know, I just start turning things to see if I can cross thread it first. There we go. I get that going, and I want it threaded. You don't want just a little bit hanging out. I want to get threaded past my lock band, so I'm going to go all the way in, and hopefully I've got enough there to keep from having to adjust it a bunch. Then I get my other one in, and I want to turn it left hand thread, I think. Maybe right hand, but I think it's left hand. There we go, yeah. Left hand, I want to do the same thing, and I want to run it down past my locking band. And the locking band moves around some, so it's not an exact thing, but you want to get it where there's plenty of bite in there. Alright, so now we're in past that on both of them. We can get this thing set on the center link and on the steering knuckle and see if we can get it kind of halfway adjusted where it looks straight. Do the other side, then we can get the tires on, not really do an alignment, but kind of just check a little bit of toe in very crudely and see if we can get it to where it won't try to jump around on us while we're pushing the car around, because if the tires are uneven on the toe in, it'll make it very difficult to push the car around while we're doing all the other work to it. Okay, I'm not sure how well you can see in here where I'm going, but I've got my tie rod set up, and I've got the inner tie rod ready to go in here to the center link, and it goes on the outside of the center link pointing in, and I'm going to put my castle nut on the back side of that. Just get it kind of hand tight, and then I've got a lot of adjustment to do to get this spindle even close. You can tell I'm off by about 3.5 inches or so right there. So what I'm going to do is adjust everything, and like I said, if you spin it one way, it's going to tighten both of them. If you spin it the other way, it's going to loosen both of them. So I'm going to get this adjusted in a lot farther so I can get this joint in here, and then I can do the same thing to the other side. Okay, so I've got that shortened up considerably. So now I'm going to get this in, my inner tie rod in back into my center link, and get the castle nut on it. And I can worry about my steering arm. Now this one goes in the bottom of this, so I probably need to come out a little bit. and then get my castle nut started on there. And I just want to try to get this as parallel as I can, so I want to loosen this up some, draw that out. And really you can't get it exact until all this is tightened, because when you tighten it, it's going to seat the taper on these joints, and then it'll move around a little bit. So I'm just trying to get it somewhat parallel with the body, and then I can tighten up my castle nuts pretty good, and then I can torque everything down and put my cotter pins in. Do the other side next. Okay, so you can see the front end is complete now. We've got our control arms, our springs, steering box, center link, all of our tie rod ends, everything's new. Now, what we did here was rebuilt the control arms, new ball joints, new bushings in the uppers and lowers, all new steering components except for the pitman arm. It's not new because it was fine. It was very tight, good condition. The steering box is just cleaned up and painted along with the springs. Everything else looks pretty good. What I don't have is the shocks and the sway bar. And I ordered some shocks, and I've got a sway bar coming, and they're not here yet. Now I could go down to O'Reilly's or somewhere and pick up some, but what I ordered for this, I'm gonna leave. We're just gonna put the ones I ordered on there when they get here. So what we're gonna do is get this thing jacked up, get some wheels on this thing, and get it rolling. All right, it's coming along, it's starting to look like a car now. And there's a lot left to do. I'm way behind on time, but I'm pretty good on my budget. I'm still over, but I'm not as far over as you would think. Now, I've got brakes, fuel system, engine and transmission to install, some interior work to do. I've still got some metal work to do, and I'm not sure how far I'm gonna go with metal work. I've got to fix the dash on the front. I've still got to fix the channel on this side. I've got a pretty good bit to do. Then I got to get glass put in it, so I've got a little money left to spend. I've got some work left to do. I'm going to hopefully have this thing done and running by the end of May. Going to take a real short road trip in it, and then we're going to get this thing sold. Now I'm going to try to sell it for close to what I've got in it. It'll be close. It won't be far off, but I need the money to put into other projects. So you know, you can't keep them all. I mean, you can, but I can't keep them all. How about that? But yeah. So anyway. Guys, I appreciate you watching all my videos. Comment, I try to answer everyone. Like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.